Well, it's 3 after, so I think perhaps we should just go ahead and get started and people can come in and catch up as they need so that we do kind of stay on track for us.
Okay, makes sense to me.
Okay.
So in that case, since I'm first up, I will get us started. Hi, my name's Ruth Dewar. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Semantic Harmonization Cluster with Gary, who's in the room with you all. And today we're going to talk about answering common questions and maybe alleviating some misconceptions about semantics and semantics resources. Next slide, please.
Do you want me to do that? Okay.
But first, please, if you're in the room or if you're online, please add your name, affiliation, pronouns, etc., to our attendance list in our notes document, which everybody should have access to. Somebody please put the link in the chat just in case people don't have access to that. And next slide. And I'd also like to remind everybody that by participating in the session, you're agreeing to adhere to the ESIP community participation guidelines, which you can find on the ESIP website. And to report an issue, there is the link to that site as well. And next slide. And I'd like to give a land acknowledgement. I personally am participating from the traditional territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Osheti-Sequan peoples. I acknowledge that legacy and find inspiration from this land. And we each have a responsibility to consider what it means to acknowledge the history and legacy of colonialism in our history as a nation and as a community. And throughout the discussion during this session and throughout this meeting, it says summer. Yes. I don't know about what the weather's like where you are, but here it's not that summery. We note the privileges we enjoy today because of colonialism, and we strive not to perpetuate a colonial future. Next slide. So as I said, we're the ESIP Semantic Harmonization Cluster, which is one of the clusters underneath the ESIP Semantic Technologies Committee. We've been having 2 calls a month for the last, I don't know, a long time. And our next call is coming up on August 9th and with a call on August 16th. We typically make the 2-hour working sessions into literal working sessions where we're actually doing some sort of work, like harmonizing ontologies of some sort. And then the other call in a month is a organizational call. And we have a Slack channel and an email list, and I encourage everybody to sign up for all of those and attend as many of these things as you possibly can. I also note that this is probably an appropriate time to change the times and maybe even the number of cluster calls we have a month, because next slide. We've just actually published the major work that we've been working on for the last, I don't know how many years, but more than one, on cryospheric semantic harmonization. And we've submitted a paper to the Data Science Journal. Haven't heard back on that paper yet, but the preprint is available out on the Earth Archive repository. So next slide. Now this cluster held in the January meeting a session on semantic successes and roadblocks. And you can use that link to go see the full session details, etc. But next slide. One of the things we did during that meeting was ask people what was preventing them from getting started using semantics in their work. And there was a lot of comment. Actually, this is only the first page of 2. We actually didn't expect quite so many comments, but we got lots. And so we've been spending the last several months since then, next slide, analyzing that. One click, please. Where we've categorized all those comments that came in into a couple of different kinds of categories. One of the major categories turned out to be sort of educational things, where there were lots of fundamental issues people didn't know. They may have had misconceptions about what semantics is and what it can do. And there were a number of things related to people not knowing how to learn any more about semantics. And one more click. And there were also a lot of what I would call cultural roadblocks, which education can help with, but cultures are a little bit more difficult to change because it's not simply facts, you know. In many cases, it's things like, you know, until you understand semantics, you don't get semantics. It's kind of a Kool-Aid thing. So next slide. And then especially in the earth science and environmental community, there are community roadblocks around governance, places to put your semantic resources so they're fair. Some of these things are a little bit misleading as well in terms of tooling and such. I'll talk about that more on the next slide, but it also includes things like funding issues. And so that's kind of what we came up with as the result of that January meeting. Next slide. And I don't know why that's blank, so click again. Okay. So one of the things we decided was that we should take a look at like the educational roadblocks and see if there was anything that we as a cluster or the committee even could do to resolve that issue. And so that's actually how this session got started. So next slide. One of the things that came out of the paper was kind of this general semantic harmonization process. And one of the things we were finding from the January meeting is that people were always talking about, oh, there's no easy tools that you can use to do X, Y, or Z. So I thought I would take our general semantics harmonization process and next slide, put some of the tools that actually do exist to help with those things on here. And one of the things that I think you might be amused by, or at least I was, is that spreadsheets are useful pretty much everywhere in the whole process. And there have been, and just prior to this session, I believe, a session on YAMS, which is a useful tool for dealing with existing dictionaries, glossaries, and things of that nature. There's the Ontology Development Toolkit, ODK, which I personally have used and was successful in using, which comes out of the OBO, the biomedical communities, to actually help people do ontology development and set up things like GitHub structures and stuff like that. Oak, which is a Python library for dealing with any kind of vocabulary things. Robot, which is another OBO tool that helps you do things like cut little snippets out of ontologies that are useful for you, that are, you know, ontologically complete and reasonable. Test your ontology to see if it's not inconsistent. Protege, which is a tool everybody always talks about for developing ontologies, but which is useful because it's free, but also very complicated. And Otter, which are all about design patterns and such. Next slide. So what is this session all about? This session's all about really trying to start providing some of that education that was asked for back in January, and to figure out what that really means. In other words, what kind of training do people really want? What would be useful? And what would you actually attend? And so next slide. So what we're going to do today is we have a panel with several lightning talks. Each talk hopefully will be sort of the start of answering some of those questions that were asked in January. And so we're going to do those talks, and they're going to be very quick talks. I'm going to be the timekeeper and try and keep everybody on their 5-minute schedule. So we're going to hold questions to the end. And then after that, we have we've reserved about 30 minutes to discuss issues and priorities for that future training, and Kate will lead us through that exercise and a questionnaire and discussion. So with that, I think I'm going to turn things over to Kate.
Okay, sounds good. We're back to the beginning.
And I'm using a timer, by the way, so you will hear a tone when your time is up.
We need a different one. It's this one. Okay. Cool.
And I know I'm going to be kind of obnoxious if you go over time, so just beware.
Are the slides visible? Oh, there we go. I know. Okay, I think that should do it.
I don't see slides.
How about
Nothing yet.
now? Oh, all right. Right. That's right. Gotta get that. Share screen. And then first one on the left, second row. First screen.
Got it. Ready, set, go.
All right. Hi, my name is Kate Rose, and I'm with the National Centers for Environmental Information, NOAA. Actually, also with through their cooperative institute, the Northern Gulf Institute at Mississippi State University. And I'm quite a new member to the semantic harmonization groups. Actually, it's probably been, I don't know, over a year and a half or so. But I kind of came to ESIP because I had this problem that I was trying to figure out for a project that I work with, and actually was really able to, and I had no knowledge of semantics at all, other than just doing some Googling and getting really confused and kind of lost, but managed to connect with the semantic harmonization and the semantic technology clusters, who really kind of helped me guide me in the right direction and, helped me figure this out. So the project that I work on is basically called CMEX. It's the Coastal and Marine Ecological Classification Standard. I know that you guys maybe some of you have seen this slide already this morning, but just really quickly, it's basically a thesaurus of defined terms, which we call ecological units, and they're used to annotate observational data in coastal and marine and lacustrine habitats. And so it is sort of based in different components that are thematic at different domains, like the geoform, water column, biotic, substrate, and then sort of wrapped together in these large-scale aquatic settings and biogeographic settings. So they're organized in a very specific way to complement GIS methodologies. And the idea is that, even though you could create maps in one or any of these different components as a standalone map, standalone layer, you could also combine them all together to form this biotope, which is really sort of like a model of an ecosystem. We have a lot of people who use this, like in NOAA Fisheries and BOEM, deep sea corals research, and using these to create habitat maps so that we can identify the habitat where organisms exist, and then hopefully go on, use that information to either predict potential habitat or have further research on organism behavior and how they exploit their habitat and so forth. So I put a box down there if anybody wants to look at the full standard. CMEX is actually, in its current state, is a PDF and also a series of spreadsheets. And so it was also designed to be updated over time. And so we're going through this first cycle of updates where we're reviewing all of these units and we're reviewing the content, working with subject matter experts to help us craft, who are also in our user community who have been suggesting improvements over the years. And so we're trying to implement some of those improvements. So my dilemma was, okay, well, when we do that, now what do we do? Because we want to make this, updated resource accessible to people. We don't want to just put out like a PDF and spreadsheets. We want something that is machine readable, and so on and so forth. And so that's kind of why I got started. Oh, I should have switched to this slide, but so we already have our resource. I'm going back to this first figure that that Ruth showed in the semantic harmonization workflow. We have our resource, but yes, unfortunately, it's in sort of like a legacy format, and we want to update it and make it machine readable and interoperable. So yeah, we have that process that we use to vet and to craft the improvements. But what we really needed to do was also do this format and technological updates so that we could, track changes, publish new versions, so on and so forth. So I didn't really know where to go with that, but I think a colleague had told me to look into SCOS and gave me some examples. And so after a lot of Googling, and as I said, sort of getting misled and lost and diving into things that were way over my head, kind of, became acquainted with the semantic harmonization groups here. And so I just wanted to sort of put together just a couple of, out of everything that I looked at, the things that had been most useful to me, if anybody wants to, feel like they need to dive in from ground zero. So for as far as software and training goes, I heard about Protégé early on, downloaded that, and did a couple of the existing ontology trainings, one that comes off the Protégé website, the wine ontology, which was a little hard to follow, but it actually did explain some of the ontology concepts. There are a couple of different versions of the pizza ontology by Michael DeVellis, but that's a link to the most recent one, which I think is far and away much improved over the earlier ones. And then, as I said, I was starting with some—
Time is up.
Hello? Time's up?
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm not going to go through those, but I'm going to finish on this last slide and say the reason that, what I've learned from the semantic harmonization groups too is just different ontologies can be structured differently according to the needs of different communities, right? And so even though, as Gary and other people talk about later, we don't necessarily want to create something new unless you really have to. In my case, I feel like we really have to. But being able to be interoperable is actually also going to help us reduce our workload if we can harmonize with other similar terms in other domains. And so that's kind of work that we have sort of planned and want to go forward with in the future.
Next up is John.
Oh, that's your ass.
Oh, actually,
It's beyond Google.
that one.
Okay.
You're right. Perfect.
Should be able to.
I see it.
But don't have percent around this. Hang on 1 second. There we go. Okay, now you should
Very
be good.
impressive. It's a lot of clicking.
All right, go.
There we go.
All right, we are now cooking. So I'm John Kunze. I'm talking about YAMS, yams.net. This is a tool we built for, it's basically a vocabulary builder. We think it's, Jane Greenberg and I dreamed this up a while back. We're both veterans of the Dublin Core metadata standards, and we vowed we never wanted to do anything so atrociously inefficient ever again, and with such a bad result at such a high cost. So the idea here is that, let me just see if I can mess with this so I can see what I'm seeing. Yeah. So YAMS stands for Yet Another Metadata Zoo. We recognize that there are many different claims to your attention on claiming metadata terms. In fact, so this is an open claiming system. We called it crowdsourced before, but that kind of scared people off. It's not Wikipedia. Rather, it's more like Stack Overflow, where you assert a term, and that term that might already be taken, but you can assert a different definition and get a unique concept identifier for it. And you get a persistent identifier for it, in fact, so you can trust it. But public feedback and reputation-based voting can help you make decisions about it. So what this is a meta dictionary. It's kind of all parts of metadata speech, all domains are admitted. You add a term, get a permalink. You can use existing terms in there. You can share and refine your terms. You can edit them, only you can edit your terms. You can cherry pick them later for your ontologies. So you've got your working groups. And so it is not a standard. It's just a big bag of words. And this helps you, everybody doing an ontology, and I assert that it's much more than ontologies. Anyone doing a pick list, anyone doing a column headers on a spreadsheet is engaged in ontology work. And it'd be nice if you could declare what you're doing. And you can dialogue and test and refine and then make informed choices based on actual feedback. So we think this is a much better approach to the work that we all have to do. So here's sort of what it looks like. Here's a term, glacier. You can search for a term and walk away with with terms that you like. Anyone can do that. You can log in to comment. You can also upvote and watch terms, watch for when they change. This term is in the vernacular. All terms are born in the vernacular where they're evolving. So if they reach a certain level of stability and consensus, they become canonical, they stop evolving. So depending on your risk tolerance, you might cite something in the vernacular if it's your term, and someone else is a term from the canonical class if it's one you don't know that well. I got ahead of myself. You can add terms and immediately walk away with an ARC persistent identifier. You can see over there on the right. And so the term already exists, that's fine. In fact, there are 28 versions of Glacier, as you probably well know. YAMS actually was born out of this. Original name was Sea Ice, because Ruth had some big stack of papers. We just wanted a name quickly, and we just saw Sea Ice, and let's do it. So you can import whole sets of terms and you can tag them. The idea here is that standardized metadata is very rare. In fact, I will assert that nobody uses metadata standards except as inspiration for your local dialect. And the only way you have of expressing, if you have a good taste to try to express what you're doing locally, you create a PDF, and buried in the PDF is what you're doing, and it's really hard to find. This way, you could actually link explicitly to a term and a definition. So we tried to make this really simple. Didn't use scary things like ontology, because we don't want to scare off the domain scientists. So we have so many different unofficial dialects and so much overlap. And, this is the metadata universe. These aren't elements. If you look closely, these are all ontologies, and there's a huge amount of overlap. There's a blizzard of crosswalks and nightmare of intercomputation, all being guessed at by computer scientists who don't know the domain. So, all these domain dialects, look at these, 28 definitions of glacier, and et cetera. So I can stop here, but, okay. Next.
And yes, actually, I find it useful tool for those 28 different definitions. And the one you showed was a horrible definition, but that's okay. Adam's up next. He doesn't have any slides.
Sweet. I can see Ann's face. Like, I'm glad you're the first one to, to go without slides and how horrible this is going to be. All right. Thanks, everyone. My name's Adam Shepard. I am one of the chairs for the scienceonschema.org cluster here at ESIP. And Gary asked me to talk about lightweight semantics. And so I'm here to talk about scienceonschema.org in terms of lightweight semantics. Okay, so just as a quick raise of hands for the people in the room, have you heard of schema.org before? Yes, no, maybe so. Okay, lots of people. We might have a couple people sleeping, but I think they know of it too. Okay, so I'll skip all the what is and all that stuff and just give you the brief overview. So schema.org is just a way for you to describe data on the web to major search engines or harvesters who have the capability to scrape the web and better understand the content on your web pages. And so myself and Doug Fils back in 2018 started an initiative in EarthCube, which is an NSF program to help data repositories better describe their scientific data sets to Google. And that was well timed because Google was working on a data set specific search, which I think if you just Google data set search, you'll find this amazing tool here where you can find data sets from NOAA, Data One, BeacoDemo, all sorts of repositories around. And that's because primarily they're using schema.org on their web pages. And so anyway, I don't want to get the hand slap by Ruth and the timer. And so I'd encourage you to talk to us. We're looking forward to your questions during the discussion time. But you can Google scienceonschema.org, and what we have there is a GitHub repository with tutorials and documentation that sort of walks you through at a very basic and easy pace on how to begin describing data sets on the web. So yeah, I'll cut it there and leave more time for discussion. Thank you.
Take me a couple of minutes. Yeah, so I'm Gary Bergcross. I'll talk while we're getting the slides up. I guess they're getting up there quickly. So I am the co-chair of the Semantic Harmonization with Ruth. And I'm going to be talking about some of the things that come out of that work, but also some other work. On this slide that you see here is a reference to a ontology summit sequence. We ran about 15 weeks of presentations on ontological topics on how to make semantics easier for researchers. And so at the end of this, I have a reference page, 2 pages actually, with links to things. So there are sessions on each of the tools and more of the tools than Ruth had on her slide about ODK and the OAK and things of that nature out of the Obo Foundry and other efforts. So let's see if I can make this go. Okay, so this is a continuation again from the January session in terms of your questions. I'm going to try to take on a few of the questions and try to give you some ideas. And so how do I start and why is it so difficult were 2 of the important questions. So I think I'll try to address a little bit of that. To start, you have to understand what your goals are so that you can have a very deep penetration into semantics as a goal, where you want to support data interoperability or linking to other ontologies and being aligned with them, or you could have simpler types of goals such as finding things. So first is to decide if you're going to be sort of in what Adam talked about in terms of light semantics or heavier semantics. And of course, you can evolve over time. Now, we know there's lots involved in semantic technology. There's methods, there's tools, there's standards, and so forth. And over time, these have actually gotten richer and have more instances that you can choose from, various tools. But at the same time, we've gotten a little bit better about best practices and how to use those. So how do you start? One place to start is looking at ontology libraries to see what you can reuse, use, and reuse. There are, for example, ontologies on the bioportal. Core itself within ESIP is a place to start looking at things like the suite ontology. So there are not only libraries for ontologies, but there are libraries and repositories for the larger realm of things, which is called semantic resources, which are have semantics at different levels. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But first, I wanted to compare human ambiguity and computational ambiguities. But there are ambiguities in both domains. The diagram I have here about an elephant illustrates human ambiguity or misunderstanding, okay, where you're sampling a portion of a complex objects and you're coming up with a label for it. And the label can be interpreted in many ways. So if we understand a complex object better, we can have a definition, which you see on the right. And we're all familiar with the definitions of elephants in terms of being large. Some of us know they're hairless. We know about features like trunks and so forth. That's a textual description. We get closer to a formal description, at least for a human, as opposed to something processable by a computer. And you see in the lower example where we say specifically things like it has some part, which is a trunk. It is a type of thing called a mammal. It has some characteristic of size and so forth, even down to the idea that it consumes certain things in distinction to other animals. So it's a vegetable consumer. So this is a start on reducing ambiguity about a complex object like an elephant if we were exploring it. I think I skipped a slide here. Okay, it's not there. The slide well, maybe we'll get to it. Let's see. I might be out of sequence. Visualizing an elephant and seeing it as a whole is very useful, a complex object. I'm showing a complex phenomena between the sun and the earth in terms of space weather, a topic on heliophysics, which Ryan and others, for example, at ESIP have talked about sometimes. The diagram contains a lot for a human to understand. What about moving some of that so it's processable? So we can have definitions like I had for the elephant, the magnetosphere. I have things about its place and how it's related and things of that nature. That's a step in reducing ambiguity so that we can understand this thing in a piece. And here's the slide I was looking at before. I was talking about semantic resources. All the way up to ontologies, but they have other things like the vocabularies that have been mentioned. And here's an example of a very small vocabulary item, solar wind, and just one element about it. It's a stellar phenomena. And you can find that item within some ontologies, as are down below. The suite ontology contains it. On the right, you can also see you can formalize this knowledge in a variety of ways, some of which will be processable. So we've moved from little statements and so forth into forms that are now processable.
5 minutes are up.
Okay, there's more slides, and you can view these, which will also show you how to visualize the knowledge in a model. And I've taken some of the vocabulary in CMIX and made an ontology out of it, using ChatGPT, which is loadable into Protege and is visible in Visual Owl. So those are examples of how you can get started because there are tools out there to help you do some of these things easily. And with that, let me turn it to the next speaker. Anne.
Who is Anne?
I don't know, who's Ruth? All right, hi everybody. My name is Ann Thesson and I'm an associate professor at the University of Colorado Anschutz, which is actually a medical school, which is weird for me and everyone else in this room, I imagine.
I have had a very unusual career path. I started out in oceanography and then gradually moved over into data science and informatics. And I did a postdoc with the Census of Marine Life and the Encyclopedia of Life. And that's where I first came into contact with semantic technology way back in 2008, 2009. And I can remember thinking, this is it. This will solve all of our problems. All we have to do is start using all of these ontologies, and all of the data integration challenges that we were having within EOL would be solved. Well, I think I was right, but I was also very, very wrong, because it would have taken way longer than just 6 months to a year that I thought is all it would take to solve our problems. And so I was asked to come here today and speak a bit about lessons learned on my way to proficiency, whatever that means. I still don't feel like I'm proficient. But anyway, and I don't have any slides. Instead, I have a little cheat sheet here listing 3 lessons that I learned along my journey. So the first one, I think, is echoes a lot of what's already been said, and that's the importance of your use cases. And, you know, the human brain really likes to organize things. So it is very easy, especially for someone like me, to see an ontology, see how everything is ordered so nicely and neatly and beautifully, and want to just order the entire world that way and get as complex as you possibly can, because, ooh, isn't that cool and neat? But that's a quick way to kind of fall into a rabbit hole and wind up with an ontology that is incredibly complex and completely unusable. So it's really important to think really hard and really clearly about what exactly you want to do with your ontology or with your semantic technology. What problem are you trying to solve? What are you trying to accomplish? And there's a whole process that my lab likes to go through with these new communities when we're trying to build semantic technology for them, where we sit down and ask them, okay, what kind of research questions do you want to answer that you can't answer right now? And that forms the basis of all of our work. We take those questions and we really analyze them and break them down so that we can understand what kinds of things or what kinds of elements are in those questions, what kinds of existing ontologies would we need to represent those things, and what kind of relationships do we need to capture in those ontologies? And then do we even need to make an ontology? Can we reuse an existing ontology? And then how do we go from the ontologies to the knowledge graph that we would then use to actually answer our questions? And so these are all things that you just have to think about very carefully. And that takes time, so don't think that you're gonna do all this in a day. And that's fine, that's normal. And it could be that what you wanna do does not require semantic technology, and that's okay too. But it's good to give these things a thought so that you don't wind up wasting a bunch of time. The second lesson that I learned is related to the first. But one thing that I've seen a lot of different communities do is, you know, they go down that rabbit hole, and maybe they have their use case, they have their vision of what they want to accomplish, but then they spend years developing the semantic infrastructure so that it's really mature. It's like up here, but the data is not ready. So at the end of 5 years, they've got a really mature semantic infrastructure, and the data's not ready. So then they have to spend another 5 years to get the data up to match. So it's 10 years before they can actually do anything. Most funding agencies, most bosses do not like that. So it's always better, if you can, to advance the infrastructure, advance the data, advance the infrastructure, advance the data, so that you actually have a product or something that you can show that you've accomplished in the shorter term. And so the third and final lesson that, well, I won't say final lesson that I've learned, but the third lesson that I'll talk about today is that anytime you get involved in something like this, anytime you make an ontology or make one of these semantic infrastructures, you have to keep in mind that any good standard is a living standard. So when you make an ontology, it really needs to be with the community. And you don't just make an ontology, you also make the processes by which it can be updated, the processes by which other people can comment on it, request new terms, deprecate terms that don't make sense anymore, and figure out how to document those design decisions along the way.
Time is up.
And that's it. Awesome.
Is Marshall in the room or?
Yeah,
oh,
I'm
he
here.
is. Great. You're up.
Okay, 5 minutes. I have 25 slides. So anyway, I will just go over the first 5. So in the past few weeks, in the course with Ruth, Gary, and some of you in the cluster, I said, oh, maybe I can share some of my slides because I'm teaching 2 courses at University of Idaho. One is exactly about semantic web and open data, and another is about data science. And some of my postdocs and the PhD students, they also have an interest learning how semantics, knowledge graphs can be used in the data science work. So I said, okay, let me put together some slides and then provide some examples for the postdocs and the students. So far I can share some of them also here. The first few, I think they're very conceptual, just like an overview, like what is exactly ontology and then what is exactly knowledge graph. Like here, it's like people memorized the spectrum of ontology, starting on the left, very simple forms, catalog, glossary, until to the very right part is you can use a lot of serious logical assertions like a disjoint subclass, transitive properties, symmetric properties, those kind of stuff. And then this one, I think I included it in a recent review paper. I think what I did is just try to elaborate some workflows in the traditional relational database, like from domain and then conceptual, logical, physical model to the implementation of a database. So I was trying to, I think this also has a relationship to the very recent work people are doing on knowledge graph or knowledge representation. So I show people this diagram just to convince them building ontologies, building knowledge graph is like, it's not like doing something from scratch. You can reuse a lot of existing resources, including the conventional work on conceptual models and the relational databases. And here, I think this one is a little bit dangerous. It's just like my personal point of view. I was trying to put together the FAIR principles and the work on semantics, like along with all those detailed principles in the FAIR structure, which item has kind of strong or medium or light relationships to semantics. Maybe just my own point of view. I think many items in interoperable and reusable, they have a very strong relationship to semantics. But actually, I think many of them, they are closely related to semantics and the vocabularies and the knowledge graph, just kind of point of view. But here is my key point for the postdocs and the students in my group. Because knowledge graph is such a big topic. Data science is also a big topic. How to make it a little bit more simplify it and then lower the barrier for them to come into this field. I said, okay, let me use a simplified diagram of data science, the data science workflow. And then I collected a number of examples for each step in this workflow, showing how semantics, how knowledge graphs can be used. You can either see to catalyze or to accelerate or to smooth the step in the data science workflow. So Adam, I do have schema.org. I used your GitHub. Students like it. Okay, and then when I was a PhD student, I was in Europe, and then people there, they work on a really interesting project, how to share geological maps on the web, and they use multilingual dictionaries to do some really interesting work, including federated queries for database distributed across Europe. And then for the exploratory data analysis, I use an example from University of Münster. They use ontology to do some explanation in the R environment for spatial statistics. And then for very serious or detailed machine learning data mining, I collected two examples. One is from IBM and IFP. This is in France. They use semantics, and I think they have models for both text mining and graphic analysis. But they have embedded some semantics-based methods in them. And another one is called Jubia. I think it's object-based image analysis. This one is, I think it's very popular now. And it's kind of a way to infuse knowledge or knowledge representation or knowledge graphs in the process of remote sensing image processing. And the very last two, I think, is related to provenance and the metadata documentation. MatClip is a project in Spain. They did something really interesting. They can, in the R environment, they can record the provenance of the process of image generation, and they can encode the provenance in JSON format and append the JSON code inside the image, somewhere inside the image. So it's still a PNG or JPEG, but just somewhere inside it, did a piece of JSON code. And that's a preference about the workflow, how this image was generated. And then once you have the image, you can drag and drop the image to the portal, and then the portal can read, I don't know how, but it's kind of secret way, they can read the JSON file inside the image and visualize it in kind of graph. And then it's interactive. Whenever you click a node or edge in the graph, you can see the RDF code. And then the other one is the globalchange.gov. This one was a project I participated when I was a postdoc. In this one, we use POF-O, the preference documentation ontology. And then this is a huge project. And that time is the third national climate assessment. I think now it's already the fifth one. I don't know whether US GCRP is still using the ontology or not, but later I can go back to the portal and check. I will stop it here. So for each example I showed here, in the following slides, I have detailed information about them, publications, and the links to the websites. And the slides were shared in the folder. So if you are interested, you can go there, check more details. I need to stop it here. Luce?
Great.
Yep.
Great timing. Okay, so Kate, do you want to take over the discussion and question and answer period here?
We're going to need a microphone that goes around, right?
Yeah. I think now we're just going to have like an open question and answer kind of period with sort of all of our speakers. So we can take questions from the room and be sure to use the microphone if we have any. So, and if not, we'll be able to see, see if we had questions online from anybody as well. Do we just have people put them in the chat? Thank you. Yes, we have a question in the room. Microphone's coming over, but if anybody online has a question, please put it into the chat.
Doug Phillips, Ronan Institute. Anne, a question for you. I really enjoyed what you were talking about there, and in particular, when you were talking about kind of the stepwise progression of the system to kind of maintain that engagement and connection with it. You also talked about use cases, and I was kind of curious, just thinking about it in my own environment where I might be able to find some of those use cases. One of the things I wonder about is, do those use cases sometimes, are they the representation of what the bold are saying versus the timid? And also, how do you prevent them from sending the work off in a particular direction rather than a generalist direction that can answer a broader set of questions?
So this is where having a really good workshop facilitator really pays off, especially when you're trying to get information about or information out of some of the quieter people in the room. There are ways to do that. And that's, like I said, that's where getting a good facilitator pays off. But it's kind of your job. Like, you just collect all these questions, and some of them are going to get very specific. Actually, you want them to be very specific, but then it's your job to look at how they can be generalized. Like, what are the threads that go through all of these research questions? And that helps to guide you in making like a data model that can cover all of these questions.
Can I keep asking questions? As long as they want to keep listening to me. So one other question I might have, more for the ontologists in the room, when you look at some of the stuff that's going on with schema.org, and especially because schema.org is such a general ontology, using that term very loosely, and also it's very open to interpretation, how do you feel about that? I mean, because it's not a domain ontology, obviously. And so I didn't know if there's any like friction between ontologists and those leveraging schema.org.
If nobody in the room is,
Anne's going to the microphone.
I can
Okay,
only
great.
speak for myself and my research group, and we've got ways to just map things. So it's not really, the way that we think about it is that it doesn't matter what standard you use. We've got ways to map them across to other standards, because you're never going to get agreement on, let's just use this one thing.
So,
Yeah,
and
SOM is what we use now. Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're going to map, but SOM is one of the ways that we do our mappings.
so this is Ruth, and I'll expand upon that and just say that some of the people in the groups that I've been working with consider schema.org to be good glue. It's lightweight glue between knowledge graphs. So like schema.org can be used to map GCMD variables to Envo or suite type variables, and to basically glue knowledge graphs together at a very high level, lightweight. I guess my concern is if schema.org tries to become more heavyweight and less lightweight, then it kind of is probably going off the deep end of its purpose. But as glue, it works pretty well already to take terms from multiple different ontologies and link them together. Not as well as SSSOM, which I guess is what Anne meant by SOM. But it is currently used to do that kind of a linking. And I don't consider that a bad thing.
Yeah, this is Gary. So my take on it is it gives you a sense about a conceptual space that is a little bit fuzzy that you can resolve. John Sower talks about this as crystallizing, that things are fluid, there's a variety of ideas and they can relate in some ways. For your particular application, you want to crystallize these into more formal relationships, but schema.org allows you to see some of that space.
Yeah. You have another.
Is this mainly for data repositories to use, or what's the incentive for a researcher to say, I'm going to participate in an ontology with my data parameter names or my research? Is it like pressure from co-researchers that would be like, hey, we want to be able to understand your data compared to ours? Is that the pressure, or what's the incentive?
Well, this is Gary again. I think a number of us can have takes on it. I'd be interested in Anne's take on this as well as Marshall's. But if you think of it from a fair perspective, there are things that ontology gives you, so that gives you better metadata that you can take farther. It supports interoperability between data also, if it's done well. So if you just sell it in terms of we're moving into the fair direction, this is one tool that you can use.
And I'll second that.
Yeah, and I'll third it. You know, that's very true. Also, it's the whole making it easier for you to combine your data with other people's data so that you can do like larger meta-analyses. So that's kind of like the research goal.
Okay, I agree all that. I'm just want to follow on with the other question is, who should be the one create that and maintain that rather than, you know, researchers? Then once some domain specific resources are created, and how we go about training, you know, providing, communicating that to researchers. First of all, they probably don't know where, if there's one, how to use it, right? So I think it's definitely not, it's hard to say, for me to say it, that research should be the ones to create the resources.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's part of why we're having this session right now, because a lot of people don't know where to start. But also so the people who develop and maintain these aren't necessarily the researchers. They're people like myself and Gary, but the researchers participate in the communities. These resources are not developed just by one person. These are community standards development efforts.
Yeah, I was just going to add that projects would, of course, have data management people, data administrators. They aren't the researchers themselves. What about AI? Researchers aren't necessarily the experts there. So the semantic side is another area where a team needs to have some expertise, and that's evolving over time.
I think you mentioned about AI. I think it's I think a large language model are become more popular. So, how do you has anyone looked into what the semantics be used in or harvested in by the or learned from those semantics or those language model or leverage those whatever those semantics?
Yes, I think that's. Yes, actually, semantics and having good ontologies underlying language models is very, very helpful. I worked on a couple of projects with JPL where we exactly did that. And that's part of the solution to the whole language models on their own can hallucinate and make up data kind of issues. Those can go away if you have more rigorous things underneath your models.
So I'm just checking the chat and no questions, but just a comment from Rebecca Riget, and which probably applies to a couple of the different questions that people have asked, which is just to say that standardization of terms makes search tools more effective. So hopefully that answers a question for somebody. Do we have any more questions in the room, or, oh, right there?
Yeah, here's a question. It's a follow-up on the previous one. I'm Colin Smith with the Environmental Data Initiative. And I guess my question is, how do you do that? How do you parameterize your large language model with a set of ontologies to constrain its interpretation? And I don't know, maybe just like a very high level description would be great. And if there are any resources, I'd be tremendously interested in following up on those.
Chris Mattman at JPL is a good person for you to talk to. We were basically just providing I was doing the information modeling, and he and his grad students were taking that and shoving it in to their AI systems. He's probably the best person to do that, but there's actually a fair amount of information on the web about that. And there's been actually talks by several of the large language model people about what utility having good definitions, vocabularies, ontologies, etc., underneath them as inputs into their models does. So there's work out there that you can look at.
Yeah, so I'm not currently involved in that research, but for a decade and more, I was involved in AI, an earlier phase of it. And so I have some opinions about that. This is very much a research area, but if you think about the large learning models now, they're working on all kinds of text, right? As opposed to a population that is a highly structured thing. So the idea is that over time, we'll develop better collections for large learning models to work on, to be closer to a crisp human understanding as opposed to anybody's opinion. So that's sort of, those types of refinements seem to be coming, but it's still very much in the research phase. And the other possibility, of course, is that it will reflect, the future will reflect the way the human brain involves intuition, which is fuzzy on one side versus has logical reasoning on the other side. We've evolved to have both of those. The intuitive one is the more primitive, earlier. And so we may have systems like that where there'll be this intuitive one fast thinking, and there'll be a slow thinking reasoner, and those will be combined over time. But these are all interesting research questions that tune in next couple of years. I think there'll be a lot more to have to say about that.
Thanks.
It does seem to be that time. So, but I just wanted to check and see if, since we have a kind of a small group, and this might go really quickly, anybody else have questions or online or? Well, the purpose of the session, or one of the purposes of the session, was to sort of poll the audience to see what sorts of educational topics they would like to have either trainings or things like that on. And so we have a form, but then we do have time also after that, after people fill it out, to go ahead and ask more questions. So perhaps what I'll do then is to share the QR code for that. I think I can do this on my own. If you're in the agenda, we have a link to the code to the form there, but you could also just click on this QR code and pull that up. And just give people a couple of minutes to do that, and then And so hopefully the talks that we've given will have given you sort of like enough of an idea of maybe topics that we've tried to capture in the form. But if you do have any questions about those and need a little bit more explanation, just shout out and let us know. Does anybody need this slide anymore, or? Good. Because I was just going to open up the form myself, which I can just do. And so we're just asking for like your name and an email. Let's see, I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you guys, but just I'm going to enter this so we can move forward and answer that first question. We just kind of wanted to get a polling of the audience. And so the way that the form is structured is each section is sort of like a grouping of topics. And for
Kate, can you share the screen because
Oh, okay, thank you. Hold on, I need a little assistance for that. Yeah. All right, that should,
got it?
Rena, you got it, thank you. Yeah, so each section has a couple of different questions, and first we want to know how important each topic is to you, and so like, are these trainings that you actually want? If you don't want them, just say not important, or you could just leave it blank. Actually, none of these are required questions, so you could skip over what you don't. And then, so for each topic, we realize that there might be a better way, a better format for communicating, educating these than others. And so the second section in each of these has the same questions in them, but there we're asking what training format you'd prefer for each topic. So would you prefer to have like an in-session or an in-person training at a future ESIP meeting perhaps, or pre-recorded online modules where you just can kind of go and watch a video and work through some steps on your own, or some like live virtual training modules, or just facts and resource lists were the categories that we have. And so we just have a few of these different categories, but each one is set up in that same way. So I guess we were just going to give people a couple of minutes to go through and identify what they want. And if there's something on here that you don't see, we do have a question or an open question at the end, where you can just type in what you'd like to see, or you can just, let us know here now and we'll record that just in notes. So I guess we'll give perhaps like another, let's see, it's 8:11 already. Another 5 minutes or so, but if you need more time, you can take more time.
I have a question for the form. So those are multiple choice. So you can choose more than one, right? For those.
Yes. It's pretty flexible.
Slack channel or like help desk where like you would go with your computer, all the IT services and they straighten things out for you?
Is there anything like that in the community?
Yes, I don't know if you got the microphone, but the question was if there was a Slack channel. And so yes, on the ESIP Slack, there are channels for semantic harmonization and both for semantic technology as well.
Are any questions too stupid to ask on the Slack channel? Because,
I don't think so.
okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And I think as Ruth mentioned at the beginning, we do also have like our monthly meetings, twice a month, 2 meetings.
And everybody is welcome.
Mhm. Does anybody need more time or? So I think what we were going to do next was sort of, Google Forms can kind of show us like a breakdown of what everybody was interested in. But I kind of need to sign into a different Drive area. So perhaps we could take the other couple of questions while I navigate to that. Or you've got them, but I need your help. So you're going to have to do 2 things at once. Or hand off the microphone.
Does anyone else have?
Yeah, sorry.
What's a good level
about that.
of expressivity when I'm detailing a concept, say in data sets? So I work for a data repository. We have a bunch of heterogeneous data sets, and can you be too like overly expressive on concepts? And what's like a good level to approach?
You only want to be as expressive and specific as you need to accomplish your goal. Like I said, it's really easy to like have fun and get really specific and start modeling all this stuff, but a lot of times this stuff, it has consequences further downstream, especially when you start doing like your reasoning tasks. And if you've got more complexity in there than you need and something goes wrong, it can just make it harder to figure out where the errors are. So just keep it as simple as you can. Did you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I deeply echo with what Anne just said. I think probably this is relevant to the granularity of knowledge engineering. We can always refine the model to more detailed level. I can give you an example. I actually use this as an example in my class. For example, think about the university, and then we can think about, is professor a class of person, or is professor just a role for a person? So, but anyway, in semantic web, we have the slogan, right? Anyone can say anything on any topic. There's not absolutely wrong conceptual model, But just think about it, which one is better. So I think to define professorship or professor as a role is better, because it's a semantic web class. So I want the students to understand it in a better way. So person can be a class, but a professor is just like a role for a person for a certain period of time. And then again, if you think it in a more detailed way, professor, you have different ranks. Assistant professor, associate professor, full professor, even distinguished professor, senior professor. So each of them, you can classify them. You can even define different roles. So this can make it more and more complicated. And the same way, like students, we have undergraduate student, master students, sometimes master students without a thesis, master students with a thesis, PhD students, and even PhD students. I know like different majors, like in the College of Law or College of Medicine, they have different type of PhD or doctor students. So this is the way we think about it or do it. But coming back to the original point, there is no absolutely wrong models, but just depends on the usage. If you say, okay, my way is just to organize a group of people. I want to know the background. I want to know the information. So in other way, if you define professor as a class, and then like Marshall is an instance of a professor. So for a certain type of usage, I think that's also fine. But if you want to make it very serious, I think in the best way, especially for me after the training of semantic web or knowledge graphs, I think in a better way is to define it as a role rather than a class.
So I'm going to agree with what I've heard so far, but I'll also say that there is a little bit of difference depending on what kind of an ontology you're creating, whether it's kind of an application level ontology, or whether you're, for example, doing a domain ontology, trying to conceptualize, say, the sea ice concepts in use by the sea ice research community. In that case, the standard, like, for example, in the Obo Foundry, is that you axiomize your terms to the level so that the human definition and the ontology definition are saying the same thing. So that you're basically encoding what you're meaning when you write the human definition in axioms when you write the machine definition. So that's kind of a slightly different take on it, but that's strictly for just, kind of domain ontology where you're trying to encapsulate the knowledge of a particular specific domain, say from a glossary or a set of glossaries.
I agree. And also, yeah, I can also echo this with that is the ontology spectrum or the knowledge spectrum. We do have very simple forms of knowledge graphs, just like a glossary or a catalog. We have someone in the middle, like conceptual models for databases. We also have really complicated ones using the OR language or using more complicated logic accessions.
So one small addition to that idea about professor role entity, if you look up simple definitions in dictionaries, they don't recognize the idea of the role itself. There are cases where the thinking that goes into the formal models now is a little bit more advanced than traditional ideas on that. So you can't strictly go by a definition. But as Ruth pointed out, and Marshall is pointing out, you sort of want to align these things for your uses the best way. And the idea of role gives you more flexibility.
Any other questions? People in the room? Online? I guess I can check that. Can I? Actually, did anybody have any, okay. Hands-on data semantics trainings. Anybody have any other sort of requests for training that wasn't on the form, or things that you would like to suggest from the semantics folks? Or it looks like we have, well, we've got, for the crowd that we have like 8 responses, and I think that we're probably going to have to sit down and kind of go through these and make a little bit more sense of it. But this is really good, because we did kind of want to hear from everybody how we can help, as Ruth showed at the beginning, that Jamboard with, everybody sort of putting just tons of Post-its, and we wanted to take a little bit more of a, I guess, an analytical approach to where we should concentrate our resources as far as like developing training materials and, addressing what people wanted, so.
We do have a few minutes about if people want to sort of say why they prefer one type of training as opposed to another. Just, I'd be interested in seeing what the audience thinks in terms of, what types of education you would like. Of course, it's also related to what type of topics you want, but the variability of training approaches is large, and I just wonder if anybody wants to discuss that.
Right, so the idea was to give everybody sort of like the options to select what mode of training for different topics, because some are more complicated and some you might just want to have like, a set of facts or something like that. So it's kind of hard to. Yep.
We're getting comments in the chat, like from Rebecca, that she'd
Ah.
like in-person training, because then she can ask questions and get answers and avoid simple mistakes and getting stuck in ruts.
This is Doug Phils. I was just kind of curious to get more samples and input here to this, if you thought about maybe just throwing this out to the general channel on Slack or to your own channel on Slack, or maybe you don't want the general population answering this questionnaire. I don't know. Just thought.
We had talked about leaving this open for a while, and I do think that I don't find it problematic to submit it basically to the general channel of ESIP. I mean, that's plenty broad for me, and would cover everybody we would kind of like to hit.
Yeah, I thought about, we could just email it out to people, but I think, yeah, the Slack channel would probably be a good place to do that, to distribute that. Right. And there were like a lot of semantic sessions that were going on at this meeting, I think. So, not everybody's seen the forum, so perhaps we could get that out there that way.
So I was actually wondering how you might address people who don't know that they need your help. I'm a researcher. I work with databases that have hierarchies and other things like that, and I didn't know about semantics until I came to ESIP or ontology, or I've never had any formal training in such things, but I realized that certainly benefit from learning more about it.
Well, as Ann said, what are the problems you can't solve currently or difficult for you? That's a starting point. It really should come from that.
Well, we're almost at 8:30, so unless anybody has anything else, perhaps we'll like call it a night. And I think, yeah, it would be good to get more responses from people. So we might kind of send that out and spread the word if you know people who might want to do this. Thanks, everybody. Sure, yeah. So do you copy like the chat? There's not a whole lot. Yeah. There. Okay. What I can do is pop it in the notes.
So Kate, before you leave, Are you planning on then distributing this out on the Slack channel?
Yeah, that's happening. The saving the chat is happening right now. And yeah, we can do that. Yeah, I'll do that tonight, actually. You know, I can just kind of send out like something on the general with the link and say we're had a session. If you missed it, check out the survey. So.